Our journey takes us along the west slope of the Steens Mountains to the small town of French Glen. French Glen was established in the 19th century by cattle baron Pete French and his backer Glen. The old hotel still stands, and it's a state park, and for a rather steep fee, some people still enjoy spending the night there and eating dinner. We have no desire to stay or eat there, so we will move on east of French Glen to spend the night in our own little trailer. Shortly after French Glen, we enter Malheur Refuge. We will take a few minutes to walk up a trail to a warm springs at an old homestead site. The homestead site is within Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, and information pamphlets are provided for you also. Barnes was the homestead family's name. We park and the journey begins. We go past some junipers that have been cut down. From here it is 1 foot in front of the other for about a mile. We come to a group of trees where the homestead site and water springs are. The water was plenty hot to use. In the background, some of the original willow corrals still stand, where cowboys wrestle steers to the ground to brand them with hot irons.
There would be the smell of hair burning as a cloud of smoke moves skyward from the steers as they get up and shake with their brands still on fire. We go back a little ways farther and find one of the original old sod houses. They called them soddies. They were quite warm and quite good. The roof has caved in this one, and it isn't in the greatest of shape, but still, it's one of the wonderful old soddies that are left here for us to see. I just hope that it's preserved somehow for our children's children to see how people once lived in that day and age.
Rodents have drilled holes, but still some grass grows in the sod. The original clay soil of the Blitzen Valley, piled here so long ago by homesteaders, so determined and hardy.
Everything they used and ate had to be grown here, so they planted an orchard which still grows and produces fruit to this day, right in the shadow of the old soddy out here in the wonderful Blitzen Valley. They probably warded off the cold of the night under a down comforter from wild geese. Some of the old poplar trees which were placed around the homestead are still here but dying due to lack of water. We go up once more and check the warm springs out. We even try the water, and it isn't bad, it just could be a little warmer. But in this water, we see little fish darting to and fro here. I figured maybe if we could catch one of those fish, he'd already be cooked, but the water isn't that hot.
In later years, it looks as if the homesteaders enjoyed some of the modern comforts of home. Running water was piped in from a spring nearby. And cabinets of sawed lumber were installed, so they had a place to put their dishes.
Okay.
A sandhill crane walks through the grass looking for its dinner.
From the barns, hot springs or warm springs, we move on over across the valley to the long barn on Malheur Refuge. This barn was built for feeding cattle in the winter. Even the old hay wagon still stands in the barn. The hay wagon moved up through the center of the barn, and you pitched hay off to each side to bawling cattle. The barn was built mostly of juniper logs from the nearby area. The feeders were made of juniper logs too, up both sides of the center runway where bawling cattle could stand and wait for the hay to be pitched to them. The roof has many a spot in it where the shingles are getting in bad shape, but still the sunlight pours through the roof in a polka dot pattern. As we walk through the long barn, some of the old hand-forged gate hinges are there, and some of the old Corels are out there. In the background, we can see one of the old willow Corels, which seem to be one of the favorites amongst the homesteaders. This barn is a big one. It's a very long barn. Even some of the old equipment is left here. An old hay stacker stands in the background, as well as a winch, a homemade winch that they used at that time. The refuge has gathered up some of the old pictures of that time, showing how they did this. This is cutting hay at the Sod House Ranch, and some of the cowboys riding horses and one sitting on the fence at the round barn, and even some branding steers.
California businessman Hugh Glenn sent the young but very capable Pete French to Oregon in 1872 with 1,200 head of shorthorn cattle, a Chinese cook, and 6 Mexican vaqueros to establish a cattle ranch. When French saw the verdant Blitzen Valley, he knew he'd found the place and promptly set about establishing the ranch. Using Glenn's money, French purchased land, bought out neighbors, sent employees to stake claims, which were later purchased by the ranch, and secured land using various state and federal programs, such as the Swamp Act. One effective strategy involved purchasing adjacent 40-acre parcels of so-called scrip land along the lower western slopes of Steens Mountain, extending from one rock rim canyon to the next. When these parcels were fenced, access to the enclosed public lands was effectively blocked. French was constantly in court, contesting claims and defending his actions. If he could purchase land surrounding another man's homestead, he would block access and force the other man to sell. One victim of this ploy was Edward L. Oliver, who after being whipped by French for trespassing, raised his pistol and killed him on December 26, 1897. Oliver was tried for murder but was acquitted on grounds of self-defense. French's death came 25 years after his arrival, and by that time, the French Glen Livestock Company owned over 110,000 acres and controlled many tens of thousands more. Without French's guiding hand, keeping it profitable, the ranch was eventually sold to a succession of owners. Much of it was added to Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in 1935, when the Blitzen Valley was purchased to secure water for the lake's portion of the refuge. Names and other map features are those existing in 1908 when Malheur NWR was established.
We were wakened this morning by the squawking of geese as they're flying over, so we didn't get up as early as we intended, so we're heading for Crumble Reservoir now to do a little fishing.
An old Canadian honker goose stands tall on a rock ledge as we go by, heading fishing. Another old gander waddles across the road in front of us. He's out eating a little gravel for his gizzard, and he doesn't know whether to move on or maybe fight us, 'cause that gravel, he's going to have it, and that's his road. Shortly he admits defeat and takes to wing out across Malheur Refuge in the Blitzen Valley. We see many geese out flying and feeding as we're heading for Crumble Reservoir to test the water for one of those big indigenous red-band rainbow trout. The sun is breaking up over the horizon. We're really late this morning, but we're going to move on out to Crumble and test the water anyway. Out across the refuge, we can see steam rising from numerous warm springs out in the marshes of the refuge as we move north toward Crumble Reservoir. An old goose is setting along the banks of a canal, trying to make us think that they don't really have a nest there, but I think he's lying. Hundreds of these Canadian honkers nest in Malheur Refuge, and it's an excellent place for 'em. It's been real cold this spring, but just the same, the ibis are here as we see a string of 'em beating their wings and flying over us in the early morning sunshine as we reach Crumble Reservoir. The fishing was lousy, we caught nothing, so we decide to go on and head over to the rain shadow of the Steens Mountains. We're going to the east slope of the Steens Mountains where the Alvord Desert is, and the wildflowers have just begun to poke their heads up through the desert floor as we reach there. The Indian paintbrush of a few different shades of colors are blooming quite well now. The arrowleaf balsa root is starting to bloom, giving their yellows to the surrounding area. The purple common lupin is blooming quite well in some of the protected areas. The death camas is sticking its single spike of flowers skyward on some of the barren areas of the desert floor. Some larkspur is sticking its poisonous blossoms skyward right on the edge of a wash. It may be pretty, but look out for it. Down below is the hot springs. I'm up on the hill, and there's our camp. We have the little trailer which we haul our Honda four-wheeler in, back it out, and what a nice place to sleep. We get on the Honda four-wheeler and move up and see one of the old mining shacks above us. Then we go up to where the thunder egg patch is. Marge wants to find her some thunder eggs. The soil here is almost solid thunder eggs. We can see their sort of round shapes everywhere, and some stone crop blooms magnificently right in the edge of the thunder egg patch. We've ridden our Honda four-wheeler up here, otherwise it would take us a half a day to hike up here, and we park it right on the foothills of the Steens Mountains and look around for some of the wildflowers. I go up to where there's a rattlesnake den to see if the snakes are out yet. I get there, I see one little fella peeking out of the den, but that's not a rattlesnake. I think it's too cold yet for the rattlesnakes. He was kind of a shy little snake, and when I got closer, he sucked his head back down in the den. He's probably there enjoying the warmth of the rattlesnakes. I walk up where there's sort of a tramway, where they ran their ore carts down, sort of a track. The old cable's still there. This is some of the Wesson brothers' legacy, this old mine. All their equipment was handmade. Old wheels make good pulleys. This big rock makes a good tail hold for the cables. And I climb up this very steep bank, get up on top of a little point here, and walk around, and there it is, the Wesson Brothers' old mercury mine. I look down in there. There's an old wooden ladder down in there yet, but I don't think I'll crawl down there, especially since I'm alone. Marge doesn't seem to like to go to the rattlesnake den, so she's down below taking pictures. Part of the old structure that was on the front of their mine. This was one of their methods of operation. They always put a structure on the entrance to their mine. Some of the old homemade pulleys are still here with the cables where they pulled the mercury up from down in the mine and then slid it down the hill and had a furnace
right
down
back
there
in the
to
mountain
work it
on that
over.
same fault, but it looks like it's just entirely too unstable to try to go in.
I go back, start the Honda up, and start going down the road. Marge is down below taking pictures. I don't know why she doesn't want to come up and get pictures of the rattlesnake den, but I guess I'll have to go back there later when it's warmer and see if those rattlesnakes are out. Down below us, we see the little shack where the mercury miners lived. We carefully drive down the road and check it out around the old mining shack. Back behind the mining shack, we find one of the furnaces where they heat the rock and then the mercury would melt out of it, and they'd put this mercury in vials and sell it. The old shack looks as if it's just ready to fall down at any time, but the old furnace looks as if it's going to be here for a while. And of course, in the tradition of the old miners, most everything's made of old car parts and rock. That's the two things that they seem to have an abundance of around all the old mines. We get on the Honda and move on down to the playa. We want to go down on the playa while it's reasonably nice out and see if those mysterious moving rocks have moved this year. Past a few clumps of the arrowleaf balsa root as we head for the playa. We race across the playa and find that the moving rocks have moved. Even very small ones have moved, leaving a big trail. We're guessing they were either froze in ice or pushed ahead to ice, because that rock is too small to leave a trail like that. These moving rocks have puzzled scientists and laymen alike how they could move and leave those trails. There were all kinds of theories. Some of the original theories were that these rocks were moved by the magnetic flow of the earth, and it pushed them across the playa, leaving these trails. Then there was the theory that maybe somebody from outer space came and pushed them around. And then scientists study them, and finally the theory was developed, which I buy, that they were moved by the wind. Sometimes ice played a big part in it, like we see a number of scratches here, similar to what the rocks make, but there's no rock at the end of it. So that indicates that these were probably made by ice itself. Maybe some of it got crumpled under and was pushed ahead. Then the ice melted and there's nothing at the end of the trail. But this trail here looks like it's got a really nice moving rock on it, and it was probably pushed by ice too. They're just plain not big enough rocks to have made that kind of trail without the help of ice. It's not every year these rocks move on the Alvord Desert, so when they do, I make the best of it. I'm totally fascinated by this phenomena of nature, which has probably gone out here ever since there's a playa. You can notice some of the trails are straight and others move all around. So that would indicate that it's moved in a number of days with the wind pushing it in different directions each day. Back to the hot springs to warm up a little bit. The hot springs is piped into some old pools that were made in the 1930s by some European. They put him up at the Alvord ranch, fed him and gave him a place to sleep, and he built these pools. There's still old washer and dryer tubs in the bottom of these pools, which serve very well as seats. Some of the old original tin is gone, and the old person that used to take care of the hot springs, Corel, who was so dear to so many, his picture is still there, even though he's no longer around, but he touched so many lives in a positive manner. We couldn't get away from the hot springs that evening. It was so nice, and we had some food in the spring cooking. So when it was done, we ate our dinner out of the hot springs, but then the next morning, Marge and I take to the Honda four-wheeler, and we're going out across the playa and check for the moving rocks again, only this time we're going a lot farther than just the playa. We're going clear past the end of it and out to where there's an old homestead. We're leaving a trail of dust in our wake as we buzz across the playa at about 45 miles an hour. There's plenty of clouds hanging over the Alvord Desert and the Steens Mountains, so we're probably going to have some more squalls later on, and it's plenty chilly. The Steens Mountains are capped with some pretty white snow right on the summit of them, and that snow later on will melt, taking most of the summer, and that's furnishing water for the hot springs, for all the other springs and creeks in the area, and even a little excess for irrigation at the Alvord Ranch. So that's like money in the bank, snow in the mountains. And also the cattle enjoy watering in these springs coming down off the Steens Mountains. And some of them are ice cold unless they've been down real deep and got heated by the volcanic molten rock down below, and then they move up as hot springs. The Pueblo Mountains south of us have a cap of snow. We can't help but stop and look at this very nice moving rock with its trail. Move from afar across the playa of the Alvord Desert. Past the end of the playa and then up through a sagebrush mound here as we head southward toward the old homestead site. Over the mound, our tiny gasoline motor pushes us southward. When we get over the mound, then we drop into a valley, a flat, ancient lake bed that's pretty much flat, only it's almost like a playa, only water doesn't set on all of it, so it's not really a playa. You'd need water setting on it to make a playa, or else it grows up in some of these little desert brushes. Some chilly squalls are still on the horizon as we move across this huge valley floor at a pretty good pace. Although it's kind of rough here, we can't go nearly as fast as we could across the Alvord Desert.
I started walking through this place and stepped in quicksand, and I really went in. I sunk in there clear above my knees, and I managed to get down and crawl out of it on my hands and knees. It was kind of scary for a minute there. There's my tracks where I sunk through. Right in the tree is some kind of a big bird's nest that I haven't seen any birds around, and I don't know what it is. Part of it's caved off. It looks like they've been rebuilding it every year. Another nest in that tree, and another alongside it.
We go to the old homestead site at Tule Springs. We see all kinds of tules, cattails, and also sedges around there. The old homesteaders had built ponds, and I don't know what they were for, but they had a purpose, I'm sure. The old homestead shack here was of low-grade agate. I call it the agate house, even though it has fallen down into hardly recognizable ruins. This was called home for someone. I understand it was that the last person that lived here was a man that lived here by himself, right out with the Steens Mountains in the background, and he broke horses for a living. I understand that he left about the time of World War II, but I haven't heard what happened to him, whether he went to war and never came back, or what the story is. I just plain don't know. But he left the legacy of the old agate house behind him, and it looks as if he could have had a little irrigation for a garden and maybe a little pasture for his horses, and he probably made hay out of some of the coarse grasses of Tule Springs. I go up along the edge of the springs and I see several of these ponds, and it looks like they're a good place for ducks to swim now. Every time you come along here, ducks come boiling out of these ponds. The old juniper fence, some of these old original fence, still stands with the snow-capped mountains in the background. What a paradise this must have been to live in. We go up the agate mine. I take my telephoto lens and look out across the desert. I see some movement ahead of me. I look at it for a while and determine it's an old beef cow and a calf walking up the road at a pretty good pace. I don't know what in the world scared her, but she and her calf are getting out of there. After the cow gets about out of sight, cut off by a cliff, I look out farther, and there he is. The sorrel stallion is out there again this year. That magnificent, pretty, old, large sorrel stallion, one of the wild horses of the sheep's head herd. And he's got him a little harem of mares there, and I see that he even had a brand new colt this year. How special to be able to see the sorrel stallion and his harem out here on the desert once more. We're a long ways from these horses, and they have no idea that we're around. When we finally got down closer to them, the mare and colt were no longer there. I think the colt was a little too small to run with the other horses, so she chose to just go stand and hide someplace when we went down later. But first, Marge wanted to see if she can find some agates here on this hillside. This hillside has an excellent agate mine with gem quality agates, and Marge always enjoys picking up a few of these really nice agates of various different colors. She's got her a bag with a few of them in it, and she's going to pick up one or two more. as she digs through the tailings of this old agate mine. At one time, these agates were mined with a big track hoe, and they were shipped to China to have jewelry made. Then the jewelry was shipped, finished jewelry was shipped back here. The sorrel stallion is grazing over toward the point of rocks with the rest of his mares. We get on the Honda and head down there. And there he is, the magnificent sorrel stallion with the wind blowing his mane. He's never had a rope on him and never been touched by a human hand, and he aims to keep it that way as he proudly trots through the sagebrush with his head high and his tail up to make him look big and intimidated. And he always stands between us and the mares, just in case there's a battle. He's the one that's protecting the mares. The mares peek out from behind the sagebrush before they decide to take the hoof and get out of there. A few tough old desert cattle move out ahead of us as we get over to the windmill. Ranching practices have changed recently, so the windmill's no longer in operation, but the water tank and everything is still here. The only thing that's wrong is all the fins are gone off the windmill. Past the windmill, on we head, and there goes a little herd of the pronghorn, or commonly known as the antelope around here. But they're not letting any grass growing under their feet. They're heading out through the sagebrush flat, and it looks like there is one buck in that herd. They're built to run, so run they do. Then we spot another herd of wild horses. This isn't the sorrel stallion's harem, this is another harem, but they're soon gone. On the way back, we noticed it's been a little warm today, and these are the first snakes to leave their hibernation dens, and that's the Great Basin gopher, is out laying right along the edge of the road. We had to be careful not to run over him as we head back toward camp. He tests the air with his tongue, which is used to pick up vibrations and also smells. So he's testing the air to see just exactly what we are. These are non-venomous constrictor snakes. We get back to the hot springs when a squall is happening. The water from the rain is coming down in the springs, but who cares? The water's nice and warm, and it sure feels good. We're getting rid of some of that chill we picked up out coming across the desert so fast on the Honda. The spring is being fed by some old irrigation pipe, which in several cases has seen better days, but it still works, piping that hot water into the spring. The minerals soon rust out this, or corrode out this aluminum pipe, and it leaks all over the place, but there's still enough hot water gets in there to feel really good when we're cold. It's almost like a fountain where the water's leaking from the supply pipe. We decide to go up and check the orchard out, past some lupin, and then to the orchard. The plums are blooming really nice. I hope the weather's good enough for pollination. And down below, the peaches are blooming great. The peaches are at high elevation here, higher than they should grow at this latitude, but it's a microclimate from the hot springs and a protected area. So these peaches not only grow, but they thrive, and they're even reseeding themselves. So in the fall, we go over there and pick peaches and have canned peaches. The apples are blooming, and there's cherries there too. This orchard is all part of a legacy left by Mike and Jim Weston. Another chilly buzzing across the desert, but we're dressed for the occasion as the sun sinks behind the Steens Mountains. The next morning, I'm up very early to go down and check the hot springs at the Alvord Desert, and steam is rising every place. This year, due to the economy, there are very, very few people around, so we pretty much had the whole thing to ourselves. The storm the night before had deposited a liberal amount of snow on the Steens Mountains as they are still shrouded in fog. And the hot springs is running hot and good as usual as the sun rises to the east of us over the desert hills and across the Alvord Desert as it shines on the desert. A long-billed curlew is taking advantage of the morning quiet to go out and peck for his breakfast around the edge of the hot springs. He is joined by some other species as they come in and take advantage of the quiet of the morning to peck for bugs in the little pasture right out beyond the hot springs. As the quiet of the morning gave way to a little bit of activity, and the sun rises and warms the soil a little. A great basin gopher snake slithers across in front of us to go down in a hole. I figured he was probably going down there to find his breakfast, but I think we're going down, and I'm going to get our food out of the hot springs. Our hot springs is our favorite cooker while we're out here on the desert, and it cooks potatoes to perfection in about 4 hours. And also it's just the right temperature to throw a few cans of canned goods in, and you can leave them in there just as long as you want. The pool isn't hot enough to burst them, and then when you're ready to eat, you just go roll them out, and they're so hot you have to let them cool just a little. But boy, is that the way to... After looking the mine over, it's time for us to go back down again. We take a look at some of the wildflowers along the trail. Then I go up and see these rare lupin in bloom. These are indigenous to this area and unique only to this area. There's just a narrow belt of them runs up in about this part. The lupin do bloom in a few different states in a narrow belt all the way to Canada.